Every salesperson hates getting objections, but if you're hearing them on every call, chances are you're the one that's causing them. Most reps spend time learning how to handle objections, but top performers know how to prevent objections before they ever come up. I'm Kevin from Prospio, and after reviewing thousands of calls, we built a system that cuts out up to 70% of objections before the prospect even raises them. So in this video, I'll show you the exact framework we use so that you can have smoother conversations and close deals faster. Let's get into it. So before we talk about how to prevent objections, you need to understand why objections happen and why preventing them at the start is better than trying to overcome them at the end of your sales call. Objections happen because of uncertainty. If your prospect feels unsure about what you said, how you said it, or something that you showed them, then that's going to trigger doubt in their mind. So naturally, they're going to object. It's way easier to close deals when you pre-handle your prospect's objections earlier on in the call before you do your pitch. But if you wait till after your pitch and you drop the price, especially in high-ticket sales, a lot of prospects will feel that sticker shock and they're going to throw objections at you left and right as their natural reaction. And it's going to be much harder for you to close that deal. So if you want to close more deals, prevent the objections up front. And that doesn't mean that you won't hear them again, but at least now it's one less objection to handle. And with that, let's move into the first step of preventing objections. First step to preventing any sales objection starts before you even get on the call, and that is to optimize your pre-qualification process. Most salespeople jump straight into having a conversation without knowing anything about who they're talking with, and they spend the first 10 minutes asking basic questions that could have easily been answered ahead of time. And by then, you've already lost all momentum. So instead, here's what we do at Prospio. We use a simple questionnaire before anyone books a call. This could be on your landing page or in your Calendly booking link if this is an inbound lead. If it's an outbound lead, like you're doing your cold calls, then at the end, when they agree to the meeting, you can ask them some pre-qualification questions. And the goal here is to gather more key information up front so you have more context about who you're going to be speaking with. Let's say you run a marketing agency and you're targeting business owners doing at least $20,000 a month, and you need to know a few things before they book that call. So on your questionnaire, you can have a question about their current revenue. And this tells you exactly whether or not they can actually afford what you're offering. So if someone is doing less than $10,000 a month, but your services are at least $20,000, then this saves you a lot of time. You know that this isn't a qualified prospect, so you wouldn't even take this call in the first place. But if the business is doing $100,000 a month, probably not going to get any budgeting objections. The second question you can ask is about their current marketing spend. And this kind of gives you a baseline. If they're spending $10,000 a month on ads, but they're getting terrible results, then you can almost position your solution as a better use of that budget. Third question you can ask is about their timeline. Ask when they're looking to get started. If they say now or as soon as possible or within 30 days, then you know that you're talking to someone who's ready to move fast. You can even throw in some additional questions like, what are you hoping to get out of this call? What have you tried in the past that didn't work? And not only these questions help you prepare for the call, they also pre-qualify your prospects who aren't a good fit, and they give you more context on their situation so that you can handle any concerns before they even become objections. And they also create urgency based on the timeline that they set out. Now, does this prevent every single objection? No, but it does eliminate most of the common ones. Budget, timing, oh, we're already working with someone else. And the key here is to make the questionnaire feel helpful and not like a roadblock. And you're framing it as, we wanted to prepare for the call to give you the most value, so please answer some questions. So if you don't have a pre-qualification process yet, just start here. Even if you have 3 to 4 pre-qualifying questions, it's going to change the quality of your sales conversations completely. The second step to prevent any sales objection is to read the room. Most sales calls I see is when a rep asks the prospect a question, they respond, and the rep goes, yeah, got it. Then they move on to ask the next question without really addressing and listening to what the prospect actually said. So that's one of the biggest mistakes, is only listening to their words and not listening to the real meaning behind their words. Your prospects are also communicating with their body language and the words they choose to use. If you don't pay attention to these cues, they're going to come up later as objections. And we're going to break down this step into 2 parts: their body language and the words that they're choosing to tell you and what they actually mean. So first, let's go over body language. Let's say you're on a Zoom call or you're in person, Pay attention to their body language because this is important. When someone crosses their arms or they leans back or their face tightens up, maybe it's something that you said that triggered doubt and made them react that way. Don't ignore this and call this out immediately. So for example, let's say you're presenting to a group of decision makers and you notice that Nicole, who is sitting on the other side, she just, crossed her arms after you moved on from slide 12. And you're like, that's weird. And just call it out casually. So for example, before we continue, Nicole, I noticed that after we went over XYZ on the last slide, you seemed a little bit unsure. Could you mind telling me what's behind that, just so I can understand better? And you're using more of a concerned and confused tone. And most people, when they're put on the spot here, they're going to open up, but you're doing it in a softer tone. You're not being very confrontational. You're not being aggressive. You're just asking a curious question. And then she's going to respond with the truth. She's going to say, oh yeah, I just wasn't sure how you were going to integrate this with our software. And then you can go back and say, oh yeah, that's a great question. Is anyone else in the room thinking that way? I was actually about to address that here in this slide when we talk about XYZ. And then now you're going to build their trust because now you're addressing their concern and you're preventing this objection from appearing at the end of the sales call. And the second part about reading the room comes down to your prospect's language. And I'm not talking about whether they speak French, German, Spanish, English, Japanese. No, I'm talking about the words that they're choosing to use. So if you're getting a ton of objections at the end of the sales call, it's because you didn't listen to what they're actually saying. And here's a few common phrases that you have to watch out for. So the first one is when a prospect says, I think, instead of saying, I know, this shows a lack of certainty. So if you hear, yeah, I think now is the time to make a change, that shows that they're uncertain about whether or not now is the right time to make that change. When your prospects are uncertain or confused, then they will struggle to make decisions, and this often leads to decision paralysis. Stop them right there and start asking, do you think you have to make a change, or do you know you need to make a change? And that question forces them to commit to certainty. If you are uncertain, this is going to lead to hesitation. And hesitations lead to, I need to think about it and never making any decisions. So you need them to be in a decisive state by making them feel certain. And another related example is when a prospect says, I am or I am not. And these words are the most powerful words in human psychology because it defines who you believe yourself to be. So if a prospect says, yeah, I'm just not smart enough, or I'm not resourceful enough, that's something you have to address. So I'll ask something like, and is that something you want to be known for? They're often going to say no. And I'll be like, okay, right. And the person who has everything that you want, do you believe that they're more smarter than you or more resourceful than you? And they'll say no because it's going to feed into their ego. And then I'll ask, right, so if that person can achieve XYZ and they're not smarter or more resourceful than you, would you believe that you could also get similar results if you knew how? And obviously here they're going to say, yeah, I believe so. What you're doing is you're getting them to agree that their limitation of I'm not smart enough or I'm not resourceful enough is no longer a limitation for their success. Next is I didn't have the money, so I couldn't. If your prospect keeps blaming a lack of money for their past failures, then they're setting out the budget objection before you even get to the price. So you would address it directly. Can I ask you a direct question? How much longer do you want to keep telling yourself that you don't have the money? And they will say, yeah, you're right. And when prospect says you are right, what they're trying to do is avoid responsibility and kind of brush you off. Like, have you ever been in an argument and one person is trying to leave and you're like, okay, yeah, you're right. And you're just trying to like brush them off. That's exactly what's happening here. So I'll then ask, what do you mean I'm right? And then the prospect will say, yeah, I don't want to keep telling myself that I don't have the money because of XYZ. And then you can keep probing them. You can ask, okay, and if you know that's holding you back, how important is it to change now then? And you're not attacking them here. You're addressing their language pattern and you're getting them to recognize that this is the main thing that's holding them back. Next thing we have to address is when a prospect says, it would be nice to have more clients, more money, whatever the case may be. And when a prospect says this usually means they don't actually want it bad enough. So you have to address this and call this out. Is it nice to have, or do you actually want it? And they're gonna say, well, yeah, I obviously want it. Why? Now you get them to expand on why they ultimately want this. And this is a huge difference because we work hard for the things we want and we tend to put off things that are just nice to have. And here you can keep getting them to expand on their answer by asking, and why is getting more clients important to you now though? And then they're going to give you an answer, and then you can keep digging deeper to create that urgency. Next phrase you have to address is when a prospect says, yeah, I can probably figure it out myself. And this is their ego talking. And I wouldn't challenge these prospects head on because it's just going to make them more defensive. Instead, I would validate them first, and I would say something like, yeah, you probably could based on everything you've achieved so far. But the question is whether or not you can get there. It's about how fast you want to get there. And then now you're shifting to time. How soon are you looking to achieve this? And whenever they say, oh, as soon as possible, then you're going to ask, and why is it important to you to get it as soon as possible then? So now they're going to open up and give you a deeper reason. Well, I'm only getting older and I can't afford to waste any more time. And this is where you could say, yeah, and I respect that. You're a smart businessman. And if that's the case, if you are trying to figure this out on your own, yet you're only getting older and time is running out, do you really think that's the best course of action then if you really want to achieve this as soon as possible? And what you're doing is you're planting a seed of doubt in their mind. And now they're thinking, well, shit, maybe it's not the best course of action. Maybe there's a better way. And this is where they're going to look for external conviction. So when they're doubting themselves, they're going to lean on you. Now you can push back and you can ask them, yeah, I mean, a lot of people can spend years trying to figure this out on their own without any guarantee that they're going to see success, which is fine. But do you want that for you though? They're going to respond with, no, I don't want that. And that's because your prospects value their time and they're starting to realize that it's way too inefficient trying to figure this out on their own when there's already people who have already crossed the bridge that they want to cross. So they rather invest time and resources into learning from that rather than trying to start from scratch. So then I'll ask them, then what decisions do we have to make today to start getting different results without creating any more delays then? And this is where they'll reach out for your help because they understand that they had a flawed way of thinking and that they can't achieve this as soon as possible just by doing this alone. And one of my favorite phrases is when a prospect says, that's why I'm on this call. And prospects typically say this line because they're trying to deflect. They're trying to sound like so smart and mighty, like, yeah, that's why I'm on this call, genius. Like, I know you're on this call, but that's not the real reason why we're here today. And this is where I have to keep my emotions in check because as much as this frustrates me, I'll just calmly respond with, yeah, I appreciate you getting on this call, but being on this call is like standing at the gym entrance and results happen when you actually lift those weights. So what you do after the call is what really matters. So are you committed to actually lifting those heavy weights? And from here, you're flipping it back on them. You're getting them to recognize that they have to commit to take action. Jumping on this call isn't going to change anything if they don't do anything about it. So here they're going to say, yes, I'm committed to making a change. And from here, I'm going to pull back and I'll ask a question like, are you sure? Making this change can be hard and it's going to take a lot of time. Why do you want to do that? And here you're getting them to defend their position, and now they're going to convince themselves on why they need to change. The next phrase you have to address is when a prospect says, yeah, I didn't see results before, so I quit. And this tells you that they're likely going to quit when things get hard. So I would address it and I would ask, I appreciate you sharing that. Can I ask, what does commitment mean to you? And now you let them answer. And they're going to say something like going all in, doing whatever it takes. I'll respond with, okay, and if that's what commitment means to you, why didn't you take your own advice last time? Now, this is more of a challenging question and they're going to give you some excuse, but you're not going to buy into it. And you're just going to keep probing them and you're going to ask, right, but why change today though? Like, how is now different? Now they're going to tell you some circumstances have been changed or their life's different and now's the time to actually make a change. And now you're pretty much holding up a mirror and you're getting them to see their own inconsistency and flaws. And you have to convince them that in order to make a change, new decisions have to be made. So this is where I would double down on what they just told me. And I can ask something like, respectfully, you've been dealing with this problem for quite some time now. So how do we ensure that you don't just throw in the towel again when things get tough? Now they understand that they need outside accountability because they can't rely on themselves to get the work done. And if that's something you offer in your program, then this is the solution that they're going to be leaning on. The next phrase you should watch out for is when a prospect says, I need to, or I should, or I want to. And all these words are procrastination words. When someone says, yeah, I need to start getting more leads, or I should be doing more calls, this shows that they're not committed. Stop them mid-sentence and ask them, hey, can I pause you for a second? I often hear, I need to, or I should do this, should do that. And from my experience, that's what a lot of people who tend to put things off tend to say. Now, have you considered the way you speak to yourself is potentially slowing you down? Now they're going to agree and they're going to say, yeah, possibly. Then I would ask, so how much has that costed you then in terms of time, money, and potential you could have had? Then they're going to open up and then you follow up with, and what happens then if you keep letting that type of language sabotage your results? You're getting them to understand why this way of speaking to themselves is preventing them to getting what they want. And once they recognize that, ask them to start speaking with certainty and conviction. And that's going to get them into a decision-making state. And last but not least, we have the but pattern. So when someone says, yeah, I want to change, but I don't have the time, they're already building their exit. So prospects are used to keeping their limitations by saying the word but in a negative way. So you have to interrupt that immediately. Hey, can I pause you right there? I noticed that you tend to say the word but a lot. Have you considered that every time you say the word but, that you're giving yourself an excuse to stay where you're at? Yeah, I think so. Oh, and why do you say that? And now you're getting them to defend their position once again. And the thing with limitations is that if you argue for them, you get to keep them, and vice versa. If you argue against your limitations, then they no longer exist. So you have to encourage them to speak in a different way. So can I ask that you start speaking with certainty and conviction from now on so that we have a more productive conversation? And now they're going to agree. It's like, yeah, I think I can do that. And again, I'm like, you think or you know? Yeah, I know I can do that. I'm like, okay, great. So let's continue this conversation then. So once you start listening to what your prospects actually mean behind the words that they're choosing, you'll start to catch uncertain language or hesitations early so that you can address them before they become harder and almost impossible to overcome later on. And the third step to prevent any sales objection is a concept called identity anchoring. People make decisions to stay consistent with who they believe they are. So once someone accepts a label about themselves, they're going to act in ways to prove that identity is true. You can use this in two ways. Anchor them to who they are right now, or anchor them to who they want to become. So if I wanted to anchor a present identity to a prospect, I like to do this early on in my sales call, and I would say something like, hey John, before we continue, I just wanted to say that I really respect the fact that you love taking risks to invest in your business, because a lot of the VPs I talk to, they tend to put things off, and that's because they're comfortable with where they're at. But I can tell that you're different, and you're the type of leader that doesn't like to settle for average results. And I can tell that you would do whatever it takes to reach that next level. And that's something I really admire about you. So I just wanted to throw that out there. Pause and let that sink in. Now, when you ask tougher questions later or move towards a decision, he's not going to hit you with, oh yeah, I just need to think about it. Because you've anchored them to the identity of a decisive leader. So going back on it would just make him feel inconsistent with who he just claimed to be. And there's also other traits that you can anchor the prospect to. So for example, let's say you want to anchor a prospect to someone who's responsible and takes ownership. So this prevents a lot of, oh, I need to talk to my partner, or I need to consult with my team. So you can start it off with something like this. Hey Ben, I know a lot of people tend to put decisions on someone else, like their boss, their team, or even their partner. But you strike me as someone who takes ownership, and I can tell you're the type of person who calls the hard shots around here. Is that fair to say? They'll often say yes. Now you can push and ask, and if that's true, and you're the one taking ownership here, how much longer do you want to wait before making a decision that could change things around for your team? And now they've acknowledged that they can't hide behind other people anymore, and it's solely their responsibility. And now let's go into anchoring to a future identity. And this is even more powerful because people would do almost anything to become the person they want to be. For example, I can ask, how do you want your team to describe you when you finally solve that challenge for your business? Or what kind of leader do you want to be in the next year or two? Now you let them paint that picture. Maybe they'll say something like, yeah, I just want to become the leader who is known for leading our team to our first profitable year after a few months of rough sales and not getting much traction. And I want to be known as someone who works hard, perseveres, and always solves problems as they arise in our business. And whatever they respond with, now you can anchor them to that identity. And you're gonna say, so if that's who you want to be, the leader that solves these problems and doesn't just manage your workers, what kind of decisions do you need to start making today then to become that person? And then they're going to tell you the decisions that they need to make in order to become that person. And then you're going to ask, and are you committed to start making decisions today to become that higher version of you? And once they verbally commit to making decisions of that future identity, going back on their word just feels like they're betraying themselves. They're letting down their future state, their team, and most importantly, everyone that depends on them. So the key to anchoring an identity to anyone is to get them to verbally accept it and say it out loud. And once they claim it, they're going to act in ways to prove that it's true. And this is one of the best ways to prevent any sales objection. And there you have it, my top 3 strategies to prevent any sales objection so you can start closing more deals. If you got value from this video, hit that like button, subscribe, hit the bell notification icon, and I'll see you in the next video.